welcome to chapter 15 of 604, Church History, chapter 15, Migrant Churches. We're looking at migration and the effect that it's had upon world Christianity and where that's been. We're going to start off in London in 1908 and the first Black Pentecostal church in Britain. Very exciting. And we're going to skip straight from there to 1948 and the arrival of the Empire Windrush. We have already mentioned that earlier. We're seeing the weirdness. So, you know, aside from the lack of welcome and the racism that was met, we have already discussed that. The weirdness. This is not the vibrancy of worship that we've been used to in the West Indies, and now we come here. And in England particularly, they found that very difficult, and that's why there was this necessity to start up. Well, they felt this necessity to start up their own churches because we simply weren't being welcoming, and we were being weird in the Englishness of our worship. Not so in America. It would seem that there was perhaps more of a welcome, but certainly more of the same vibrancy that they'd been used to in worship in the West Indies they found in America. We're going to see this phrase reverse mission appear a couple of times in this chapter. Sometimes it's been used in a way that isn't quite what I had in mind with it. I'm very much in favor of the idea of reverse mission if it involves them sending missionaries over here to get on and evangelize us. It's kind of not quite how Stanley is using it, unless he's using it sort of as a kind of consequential effect. This is sort of an accidental effect, perhaps, rather than a purposeful intent to send mission to us, because we're going to see a large amount of global migration, particularly from south to north. We're going to see that and see how that affects our churches. Now, when you move, what do you look for in a church? What are the issues that you go for in a church? Is it a very handsome vicar? Is that the key element that you're looking for, or is it things like style, denominational label, or something as simple as language? Is it the same language that you speak? So, for example, I'm looking at page 106 of 114 in our notes here. The Filipino Catholics, as they come over from the Philippines, and particularly in San Francisco, there it seems that they find a home in the Catholics, with the Catholics, helped by Vatican II, and the ruling there to do with liturgy and language, helped enormously by that. But we also see the growing Chinese diaspora, and there, it seems to me that the key element there is finding a church that speaks your language, rather than one that's especially Catholic or Protestant, but one that so they tend to set up non-denominational churches, but of a similar linguistic heading. What's also interesting there is, whereas Filipino Catholic, I said, is a kind of one-word thing, Chinese on the whole coming over would tend not to be Christian, or at least to begin with started off tending not to be Christian, but then there's to some degree quite a conversion rate, and so that's to be rejoiced. We are looking down the bottom of page 15.2, the Black Exodus from the American South, and then in a moment from Jamaica. So here we see the start of storefront churches. Brilliant label. Not come across that before, but obviously it's a thing, a storefront church. And these are going to grow and grow. And you've got some dates and statistics there, courtesy of Elder Lucy Smith. And a little shout out here for Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his connection with this. Jamaican migration found America to be more welcoming than England. Sorry about that, than the UK. But a lot of them settling in America and in the UK. We see a lot of them going over to the African Orthodox Church, AOC, which we just mentioned, and increasingly a Pentecostal element comes, particularly to the New York side of things, rather than to the West Midlands of Britain. Never really quite took off in Pentecostal style. having come from the West Indies, where worship style was more exuberant and super rational understanding of the Holy Spirit, church life in Britain seems spiritually sterile. Well, I think we can all have sympathy with that and see what that is. So, 15.3, Chinese migrant churches. And here we're back to the problem of assimilation that we've explored before. In the 1840s, you've got the gold rush and California and lots of migrants coming in, the setting up of America Chinatowns and the missions into those Chinatowns. But there was the expectation that these Chinatowns would close and that you would learn the language, you would assimilate completely, and that would be it. So much so that we see the Methodists dissolving their Oriental Provisional Conference of 1956. You know, you can follow the logic. If we are to be one, then there's no need for us to be separate. So let's not worry about it. So the counter argument to that, of course, is this importance of recognizing the diverse ethnic and cultural forms of the faith. And so allowing us to be just a little bit different in the way in which we speak, because our languages are different, our faith is the same, but having these differences to be allowed. And so here we see a different concept of the reverse mission. This is where Chinese immigrants come out to the West, to America and other places, and with the intent, if we can evangelize them, perhaps they can then take the gospel back to China. And so there's some details there of that approach. Seems to me, especially from when we were looking at the Church of China, they don't especially need us to be sending missionaries to them. They seem to be getting on quite fine without us. If anything, perhaps we're the ones who need them to be sending us some missionaries ourselves. In conclusion, 15.4, we're seeing religious migration as being good and healthy for us in the West. But it brings in all faiths. So, you know, that's just the thing to bear in mind. When we look at these statistics and these towns and cities and go, oh, look at the growth of Christians there. Well, that's great. But you've got to bear in mind that the entire population has grown. And with that, the whole spread of migrants have grown. And with that, you've got far more Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and so on, and Jews than you did earlier. So no wonder those statistics are up. Nonetheless, says Stanley, by having the migration arrive, it's given a diversity, it's given a strength, transformed the Christian landscape and rescued Christian practice from relegation to the status of the marginal pursuit of a small and aging minority of the population. Ooh, that is a painful quote. But I think we as Anglicans might well recognize that sort of a quote. So as we leave this point, this chapter, something to be mulling over is what will be the effects in the UK with regard to, say, Brexit, and with regard to the loss of Catholic Poles, for example, but the gain of Syrian refugees, the mix of Muslims and of Christians, no doubt. What are the implications of Trump's wall and how that's working out? So that's enough for the moment. Oh, look, I'm getting shorter. How did that happen?